Good evening. Good to see all of you. Nice evening after the crazy wind that we had during the day. It's nice and calm out there. I was praying that the wind would blow all my leaves into my neighbor's yard. The problem is I have another neighbor on the north and his leaves all blow into mine, so we just kind of trade off. But I have work to do tomorrow if the wind isn't blowing and if it doesn't rain. So anyway, all right, we are wrapping up our study of the minor prophets. We finished Malachi last week, and he's the last minor prophet. So we're going to look at the 400-year period. It's not really 400 years. That's just what everybody seems to say, between Malachi and the birth of Christ. So you won't need your Bibles this evening. A good Bible study always never needs your Bible, right? But this is not a Bible study. This is a historical study. So we won't be looking at Scripture this evening. We'll only be digging into some historical things. I have no idea if I'll be able to get through all of this or if I'll finish soon. So let's get with it. All right. There was approximately, hey guys, this thing might turn the first one and see what I can do with it. There we go. That's what we need, is a black screen. There you go. Okay, it worked. Thank you. All right. There's approximately 420 years, actually, between the writing of the last prophet Malachi and the birth of John the Baptist and Jesus, which started the whole New Testament piece going. A dramatical historical changes occurred during that time. The world knew a new power during this time that dominated the homeland of the Jews. We're going to look at some of those world powers that happened during that 420 years. There's a new language at the end of that dominates throughout the Mediterranean world. You know, God had a hand in moving things along like he wanted them moved along for the Messiah to come. And so we have new world power. This world power, even though the Jews don't want to be dominated by another world power, because of this world power, the good news of Jesus Christ will be spread. Kind of interesting. Sometimes we think things are bad, and they may be, but some good things can come from that as well. Like I said, there's a new language, and there's a whole new social status with the Jews. Their social status has been greatly altered during this period of time. So there's a new set of conditions that constitute the fullness of time. I've always, when I was younger, I always wondered, Galatians, what does it mean, the fullness of time? In the fullness of time, Christ came. Well, this 400 years that often people call the silent years, the silent 400 years, is not silent at all. Just because there was no books written, there was no known prophets. Malachi was the last. There could have been others. We don't know because there are no writings there. It's not silent. God moves even when people don't talk. God moves even when we're not moving. There are things happening all the time. So this lesson is going to attempt to show what happened to the Jewish people and their territory during this important period of time. All right, let's do a real quick review. We left the last few prophets with the Babylonian dominance in the world. In 930, Solomon died, and the nation of Israel was split in two, with the northern 10 tribes being ruled by Jeroboam and the southern 2 tribes being ruled by Rehoboam, Solomon's son. Years later, 722, the northern kingdom went away into Assyrian captivity, not to come back again, not to be seen again. That doesn't mean some of those Jewish people weren't around or didn't intermingle here and there, but it's just the nation's gone. Those 8 tribes are gone. And then in 606, Babylonia captures Assyria, who had captured the northern Israel kingdom. So Babylon takes over. And Daniel, during this period of time, we have Daniel and others being taken away into Babylonian captivity, reading particularly from the book of Daniel. Babylon was the kind of kingdom, not unlike a lot of others, who wanted the best from the people that they took captive. So they took resources, they took the brightest and best people so that they could help them. And of course, Daniel and his cohorts were among that as well. And then in 586, the southern kingdom was taken away into Babylonian captivity. I think, Babylonian captivity. So, they were 70 years in captivity in Babylon. The Jewish people were. Things changed during that time. During that Babylonian captivity, the Jews, came up with something called synagogue. That's not in Scripture. God didn't lay out the need for a synagogue. He didn't lay out laws determining synagogue or anything else. That came out of captivity because the Jews were away from Jerusalem and away from their temple, which had been destroyed. So they created a new way to worship. Now, it's kind of interesting. It really doesn't have anything to do with this lesson. It's kind of interesting. The church we know today, the gathering, the assembly of Christians in our worship, very much reflects synagogue. And so when Christians, under the leadership of apostles and other folks, kind of had to figure out a new way to worship God, church, assembly was born, and especially with the apostles and the writers of the New Testament. And so we see Paul and others establishing congregations in different places, and much of that kind of followed along with some of the workings of synagogue. Not all, but some of the workings of synagogue. Also, the scribes, we hear about scribes. They came into existence in Babylonian captivity. The Sanhedrin, the ruling class of the priests. I refer to it sometimes as kind of the Supreme Court of Israel, because they made all the final decisions about the law and about how the people were functioning and things. So Sanhedrin came along during that time, and also diaspora. There was a scattering of the Jews. Before then, most Jews lived in Israel. Before there was captivity, most lived in Israel. And after that, they were pretty much scattered around. Even the northern kingdom folks that went away. And when the Jews came back from Babylonian captivity, they didn't all come back. Only some came back. We'll talk about that a little more maybe in a bit. All right, now we're going to run into the Persian period, because we know about Babylon. We know about the captivity of the southern kingdom into Babylon, but Persia conquered Babylon, okay, under Cyrus, 539 BC. And so things changed because Persia was a different kingdom than Babylon. And Persia allowed their captives, and most of their captives were Babylonian captives, but they allowed their captives to go back to their homeland, live free, worship, kind of govern themselves. But Persia was the dominant power and overseer of that part of the world. So you couldn't get by without honoring Persia, but yet they let you go home and do your things. And of course, that's when we see, Zerubbabel come back and do his work, and we have the prophets Haggai and Zechariah working as well to come back and complete the temple. So the temple is rebuilt in 515 BC. It's not what it used to be, but at least they have a temple. They don't have a lot of the things in the temple because they were all carried away into captivity. So a lot of those could be replaced. The Ark of the Covenant, however, could obviously not be replaced at all. So a Persian king, Xerxes, came along, and he married a Hebrew girl by the name of Esther. And God used this young lady to help spare the diaspora Jews from extinction. And so if any of you have maybe been to a Sight and Sound Theater and seen the production of Esther, and you got a kind of a life-size picture of all of that. She was part of that diaspora. So that happened during that time. In 458 BC, Artaxerxes came along, a son of Xerxes, and he allowed another return of Jews to their homeland. Coming back from Persia came in steps, not just all at once. And this time we see Ezra and Nehemiah prophesying in that return. And during that time also was a lot of hostility between the returning Jews and the people who had settled in their land when they were taken captive. So when they were taken captive, other people flooded in and took over. Now that they came back from captivity, it's obvious that there's going to be a lot of resentment. There was problems rebuilding the temple. There was a lot of harassment going on and things of this nature. And then, of course, we get to 425 BC, and that's what we talked about last week. We have the prophet Malachi preaching to the Jews. Now, Persian dominance lasted for another 100 years after Malachi. Not the whole 400 years, this period that we're talking about, but they lasted about 100 years by the end of the close of the Old Testament, Malachi. All right, along comes the Greek Empire. Now, it's kind of a mixture, kind of a Macedonian empire and a Greek empire, because Philip II of Macedon was a Macedonian, and he conquered Greece and created the Grecian Empire. He was, let's see here. I'm sorry. He ruled from 359 until he was assassinated in 336. And during his reign, after conquering Greece, he made himself king over that whole empire. And Greece, he began then to take over the known Mediterranean world. And you have to remember that most of what we know historically, not just biblically, but historically around this, took place in that Mediterranean area. We don't know a whole lot of what was going on in China. We don't know a whole lot was going on in Africa. We don't know a whole lot of what was going on in Northern Europe. We certainly don't know what was going on across the ocean in the Americas, but we know a lot about what was going on right there. You have India over on the east. You have Iran today, which was Babylon, and now Persia. And then, you go all on over into northern part of the Mediterranean, you get into Greece. Southern parts, you get into those parts of Africa, especially Egypt, which was a power in its own right. So that's the area that we're going to term the known world. That was kind of the area where things began to happen. Mathematics, mechanical engineering, writing, letters, alphabet, things of this nature, historical documentation began to take place in that area. When he died, his son took over. And of course, nearly everybody that I know of is familiar with Alexander the Great. Alexander ruled from 336 to his death in 323. Now, Alexander was extremely ambitious. He wanted to build things. He wanted to conquer things. He was 31 years old when he died. And he literally, from his dad's beginnings, created this great Grecian empire. He was on the road constantly, conquering small nations and continually moving forward as best he could. He wanted to go to Egypt to become a god. As you know, Egypt, pharaohs and other were considered gods and things, and he knew about this. He and his dad were both fairly well educated. So on his way to Egypt, where he wanted to be ordained as a god, he conquered Jerusalem on the way down. Now, it wasn't hard because Jerusalem didn't put up a fight. The Jews didn't have an army. They didn't have anything to fight back with, so they just, in my mind, they just kind of walked out with their hands up and said, okay, we understand you're in charge now. And it stayed that way for quite a while. So there's a lot of interesting things that we don't have time to talk about with Alexander the Great. And if you want to look up one of the most interesting battles or conquests of Alexander the Great, look up his battle with Tyre, the city of Tyre, Tyre. Unbelievably fascinating because the city of Tyre was an island. And so it's like, how are you going to take the island? Not only are they an island, but they have walls all around the island. So go ahead and read for yourself how he managed to conquer the island city of Tyre. It's pretty good reading. All right, one of the great things that came out of the Grecian Empire was the alphabet and the Grecian language. The process of the Greek Empire was to Hellenize the known world, the Mediterranean world. And what that means is that they were introduced to and expected to use the Greek language, use and become accustomed to the Greek culture, Greek building. This is why you see Greek architecture all over that part of the world. It was because of the Greek Empire, the Hellenization of all that. Now, I don't know, because I didn't look up what kind of architecture was in vogue in Jerusalem at the time. But by the time the Greek Empire came along, you began to see a lot of Greek columns, Corinthian columns and things like that, and you begin to see a whole way of life take over in the Mediterranean area, and that was the part of Hellenization. They wanted their culture everywhere, they wanted their language everywhere, they wanted their religion everywhere, and they wanted their identity every place. Very, very, remember that. And by the way, this is just a copy of the Greek alphabet. This is, if you have seen Hebrew written, and now you look at Greek alphabet written, and if I was to say, okay, you get to make a choice as to which of these you're going to use for the rest of your life, you're going to take the Greek alphabet. The Hebrew alphabet is extremely weird, and it's almost Oriental. It's got so many lines and squiggles and different things in it. So the Greek alphabet was, not only were they pushing it, it was easy. Very much like the English alphabet, okay? I didn't say the English language, I said the English alphabet. And so it was adapted very quickly by that part of the world. Then there was a division. Alexander died, and his 4 sons that you see on there took over different parts of the empire. And then 2 of those guys were not powerful enough and had very small pieces of the empire. They dropped out, and the Ptolemies and the Seleucids took over the entire Greek empire at that time. And so the division really resulted in Antipater and Lysimachus, I have no idea if I'm saying that right, ruling in those 2 areas. And so they're called the Ptolemies and the Seleucids. So you may have heard about that in history. And then comes a very interesting time. You've got the Greek Empire fading away, and then you kind of have this area of uncertainty. Sometimes there was certainty, and sometimes there wasn't uncertainty. Under the Ptolemies, the Jews fared pretty well. They did all right for themselves. They absorbed the Greek language, and they absorbed much of the culture, which they were expected to do. Around 250 BC, a very interesting and extremely important thing took place to the promotion of Judaism and later Christianity. And that is the Septuagint was written. The Septuagint is the Hebrew Bible being translated into the Greek language. And that's why when you're reading in language like this, if you see the Roman numerals LXX, 70, L is 50, X is 10, X is 10, you see 70, it's because it was about 70 scribes. Actually, technically, it was 72 scribes that translated the Hebrew Bible into Greek. Supposedly, there were 6 scholars from each of the 12 tribes. Well, I don't know where they got the scholars from the northern tribes, but that supposedly is what happened, okay? And so that opened the Old Covenant to the world, because why? The world was speaking Greek. That's what was expected of them, and that's exactly what they did. It was a fabulous thing to happen. You see God beginning to work here. The world was not going to adopt the Hebrew language. It was not going to happen. But they were going to adopt the Greek language, and they did, and all of us today benefit from that. So the Septuagint took place in Alexandria, Egypt, and it was the thing, and there are copies of the Septuagint still around today. If you read Greek and want to read it, you're welcome to do that. By the way, many of the apocryphal books are in the Septuagint as well. So anyway, you might want to know that. All right, in 198, remember we talked about the Ptolemies, and now we're going to talk about the Seleucids. The Ptolemies kind of came to power in this area, in the area of Israel, from 323 to 198. Now the Seleucids take over from 198 to 166. Antiochus III came to rule in the Jewish homeland in 198. 30 years later, Antiochus IV, his son, Antiochus IV Epiphanes, guess I could throw this up here for you, was forced out of Egypt by the upstart, heavy on that, by the upstart Romans. Now we think of the Roman Empire as just being the massive, perfect empire of every place. Well, they had to start someplace. And this is about when they began. And so a lot of things began to happen during the rule of the Seleucids. So Antiochus IV retreated from Egypt. He retreated, and the only place to go, the only way to get back up into the other Mediterranean areas is to go through Israel. It's all there is. You just go north through Israel. And so when he retreated and he went north through Israel, he went through that area where the Jewish homeland was, and he plundered Jerusalem. And he murdered and enslaved thousands upon thousands of Jews. Besides that, he also forbade them to practice circumcision. He stripped the temple of all of its treasures, which wasn't nearly as good as the first temple, but he stripped the temple of all of its treasures. He desecrated the temple by sacrificing pigs on the altar. And that's just something you don't do in the Israelite nation. Pigs, as you know, are unclean animals according to the law of Moses at this time. So that was just one of the worst things that could possibly happen to the homeland of Israel. Started to say the nation of Israel. It really isn't a nation. All right, now something very interesting here. When we get to 168, oh, I already did that. When we get to 166, we begin to have the Maccabean period. Now, a lot of people have heard about the Maccabees, but they don't know much about them. The Maccabean period lasted until Rome conquered Jerusalem. So that's almost, well, I guess it really is 103 years. So the Maccabean period, and it's not just that they were always in charge, but this is historically is considered the Maccabean period. So when Antiochus IV demanded that shrines to the Greek deities, specifically Zeus, be erected all over the Jewish homeland, and that the priests offer swine as a sacrifice to Zeus. Well, you can just imagine how the Jews reacted to that. That was going to be horrible. So some of his generals, some of Antiochus IV's generals went to a community about 20 miles northwest of Jerusalem, and they tried to force the priests, who was Mattathias, maybe you've heard of that name, to offer these swine sacrifices on the altar. And he refused to do so. Another Jew stepped in, we don't know who it was, another Jew stepped in and made the sacrifice. But Mattathias and 5 of his sons attacked that Jew, killed him, killed the Seleucid general that forced it on him, and a number of his soldiers. That began the Maccabean revolt. We're not having this anymore. We're not going to desecrate the sacrifices that we make to our God. So Mattathias and his sons, knowing they were in trouble because the Seleucids were in power, they fled to the hill countries and began to organize a guerrilla warfare. And you can read about that if you read in Maccabeus, First Maccabeus, the 2nd chapter. So Judas, the son of Mattathias the priest up in the community, Judas managed to regain Jerusalem. Remember, they had trained and created a guerrilla fighting force. They managed to regain Jerusalem, and he secured a treaty with Rome. Now, Rome wasn't after Jerusalem at this time, but they managed to create a treaty with Rome for some protection. They built a new altar and refurbished the temple and rededicated it to God. So the term Maccabee was given to Judas. That's where the term Maccabee came from. It wasn't the last name of Mattathias and Judas and all the rest of them. Judas was given this name because the name means hammer. Judas the Hammer. Now, when we think about things like that, when we think about some of this professional wrestling stuff, you know, but Judas was a bad boy. And he organized an army of his own folks, and they took care of some issues there. And he became very popular, of course, in the country. So Judas Maccabee, or Judas the Hammer, was the hero of the Jewish wars. All right. If you've heard the term Happy Hanukkah, this is where Hanukkah came from. It became a celebration of the fact that the Jews took control again of the temples and the worship over the Seleucids and brought proper sacrificial type worship back to the Jewish homeland. So the Hanukkah is really, it's a festival of lights. And it's annually performed. This year, I looked up this year, when will Hanukkah take place? December 25 through January the 2nd. So if you know, a lot of people say, or you watch the news or something, they'll go, Merry Christmas and Happy Hanukkah. If you don't know what it is this Jewish celebration of reclaiming their worship of God from the Seleucids. Judas's successor, Judas himself succeeded in a lot of the battles to remove the Seleucids, the Syrian influence in the homeland. And this established a new ruling class in Israel, in Judah, in the homeland of the Jews. And the dynasty became known as the Hasmoneans. So when you hear about the Hasmonean dynasty, now you know what it is. It really is the dynasty that came into place because of the Maccabees and Judas and all of them retaking from the Seleucids. The priests in this situation became very powerful and rather wealthy. Now, if you move quickly up to New Testament times, and maybe you have been familiar with The Chosen, the movies The Chosen, all those different, really good. And you see these priests, and they have the robes, and they have the hats, and they have the Sanhedrin, and they have all this power. All of a sudden, they're watching out over everybody, and they have all this power over the Jewish people. That's where it came from. The priests became the leaders of the Jewish people. Rather than simply the spiritual leaders, they became the leaders. And so even after Rome took over, and obviously Rome, has an emperor or a king, and obviously they're over the place, but yet the Jews themselves are being led by whom? The priest. And so that's where that whole system of priestly governance, telling everybody how you're going to do something, why you're going to do it, where you're going to do it, that came from that Hasmonean dynasty. The priests were very powerful. They were very wealthy. Civil disorder and military weakness under the Hasmoneans actually led to the Romans taking over this part of the world in 63 BC. So the Roman Empire moved into the Jewish homeland in 63 BC. And it was all because of the disorder and all the things. Rome was Greece. The Grecian Empire was led by vast armies, conquering armies. Rome had a tendency to move into where weakness was. Didn't mean they didn't conquer other places, but they looked for weakness and just sort of, hey, we're your new neighbors, we're moving in, and by the way, we're going to tell you what to do. We're taking over here. And that's kind of how Rome operated. Now, the difference between the Roman Empire and the Grecian Empire is very simple. Roman Empire didn't take anybody captive. Greek really didn't either. Rome didn't try to force their culture on their captive nations. They didn't try to force their gods on captive nations. They didn't try to force their language on captive nations. Greece did. They forced, they forced language, they forced culture, they forced everything on. And that's why the Greek culture still survives even though Rome is in power. Greek culture reigned supreme. And Romans just wanted control. All they wanted to know is that you're going to behave yourself. And if you don't behave yourself, and if you rise up or act up against us, we will take you down. And so that was kind of the attitude of good old Rome. So General Pompey is the one that actually captured Jerusalem. And later, Antipater, the Idumean, became ruler over that area. Rome always had to have a ruler or a proconsul someplace. They tended to call themselves kings. They weren't kings. But he then began the Herodian dynasty of the Herods, okay? His son is Herod the Great. We know quite a bit about Herod the Great. And Herod the Great, of course, was the proconsul, the Roman king, as it were, the king of the Jews that had been put in. He wasn't a king, but he had been put in there. And he died about 4 BC. We also know from New Testament history that he was the ruler at that time when the wise men, the shepherds, came seeking the new baby Jesus, the new Messiah that had come. So Jesus wasn't born at 0 of our calendar. He was probably born about 4 BC, maybe 5 BC. So Jesus, you have to move Jesus' actual existence several years back in history. But Herod the Great came in 37 to 4. He rebuilt the temple. Remember, we talked about the temple that Zerubbabel and all of them had built, and it was a great temple, but everybody was disappointed because it wasn't like the original temple. Well, Herod did it better. Herod refurbished the temple. It had gold. He built the Temple Mount with all the different areas for the Greeks and for the women and for all the different places, and he did all of that. So you go today and you see the Temple Mount, you see all that. Most of that was done by Herod the Great, and because he wanted to make a name for himself, and he wanted people to come from all over and just be, oh, Herod, you're so wonderful. Look what you've done. You have this magnificent temple. Herod wasn't even a Jew. He was an Idumean. So he was despised just like his dad was despised. So the Jews were conquered and ruled by non-Jewish people for almost this whole time, except for that period of the Maccabees and the Herodian period of time. So this is, some guy made a village. If you go to Jerusalem, you'll find a whole Jerusalem created there in miniature, okay? And that's what this is a picture of. I tried to find the most glorious picture of the temple that I could find, and maybe that's it. I don't know. But as you can see, there's a lot to it, okay? Colonnades, everything. And so it was quite an edifice. And then, of course, probably at some point, maybe shortly before the death of Herod the Great, John the Baptizer was born. Jesus the Messiah was born. And we know the rest of the story. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the period of time between the Testaments. God bless.